Welcome to another CYF course, and today I want to talk about something that might be quite painful to hear and to digest. I want to talk about children at risk all over the world. Who are they? Where are they? Why are they there? And the picture you see of these 4 little kids in a refugee camp, they just stand here to represent all the children that are at risk in this world today, all the children we are going to talk about now. How many children are there in the world in total? There are about 2.2 billion children in this world in total, and roughly about 1 to 1.2 billion of these children are at risk. So it means at least half of not more of all the children in the world today are at risk. And these are staggering numbers. Some numbers that I might share with you now are even more staggering and challenging for us. It is a thought that there is an estimate of about 1 billion children a year who experience some kind of abuse. Some kind, any kind. Physical, sexual, emotional, neglect. 1 billion. Again, this is half of all the children. So when you meet children, 1 in 2 has experienced abuse in the past year. There are children who are displaced, children who are refugees. Some of them are displaced in their own countries. Some of them, some alone, some with their parents, have become refugees in another country than their own, often in the neighboring country, but sometimes in faraway countries, like some of the Syrian or Afghan refugees who made their way all the way to European countries. Many of them are far away from their own homes. And out of all the refugees, about 70 million, more than ever since the Second World War, about 31 million are children. So about half of all the refugees are children. Children are stunted by hunger, means they don't grow normally, they don't reach their full growth potential that they could because of hunger and malnutrition at an early age, when they are babies, when they are toddlers. And there is at least 150 million of such children in the world. Actually, it's estimated about 570 million children are going hungry. So that's about a fourth of all the children. And right now, we are in this COVID time. It's estimated that many, many more children and adults will go hungry because there is nothing to eat and might die. This is really sobering. There is another fact that we often don't consider, and it's the fact that only 1 in every 4 children is registered at birth. Maybe we don't consider what that means, but a child who is not registered at birth actually does not legally exist. It doesn't officially exist, which means it can never have an ID card, it can never get a passport, it might not be able to go to school, because schools require a registration. They require that you can identify yourself. So 1 in 4 children is not registered at birth, which again puts these children at a high risk, because they have, in many ways, they have no future, no education, no possibility to apply for anything because no identification card. And then another one is children who work, child laborers. And that is about, depending on the country, I found numbers between about 20 to up to 50% of all children, especially in the poorest countries, who are working. Children who are working means these children are not going to school, because children cannot work and go to school. And some of these children are not much more than slaves. In some factories, what we know is the carpet factories, where children are really slaves. Children are sold as bonded laborers to pay family debts. These children are not going to school, so they too have no real future, because no education means no good job, stuck in poverty. Their children too will be stuck in poverty. So these are a few numbers. Now a few more issues that put children at risk. There are children in the streets, anything between 100 and 150 million or more, because how can you count children who live in the streets? And many of them probably part of those children who are not registered anyway. So why do they end up in the streets? Children often end up in the streets because of abuse, violence in the family, or because the parents have died. I have friends from countries in Africa who were telling me, we didn't know the phenomenon of street children till AIDS did really hit. And then whole middle generations died. And children who would have normally been taken in by an uncle or an auntie, if their own parents died, had also no uncles and aunties left, and ended up in the streets. So death of parents could send children to the streets. Poverty, hunger. If children have to fend for themselves, if there is nothing to eat in the family, they will turn to the streets and see if they can find some money and something to eat in the streets, and ending up in the streets. And like I said, domestic violence. I've met street children who ended up in the street because of parents who left them, or new step-parents who didn't like the children of the old mother or the old father, and so they ended up in the streets. So this is one of the big issues we face today. Another one that we might not think about is that girls are often at risk just because they're girls. Girls are at risk of having lesser education or no education at all. I remember some years back we visited a village in India after the earthquake there, and we talked with the people there, and they said, yes, of course, we want to send our sons to school, but girls don't need an education. Why should we send girls to school? And again, no education, early marriage, early pregnancy, maybe death of the child, of the mother because of early pregnancy. So many girls are at risk just because they're girls. I already mentioned child labor. So many children who are at risk because they're forced to work. And in many cases, people don't even think about that this is abuse. It's so normal. Children need to work. There is not enough money in the family, so no schooling, no education, but work in order to survive. Children are being trafficked for labor, but also for sexual exploitation. Many children end up in brothels as minors before they're 16 or 18, being trafficked there, often also from poor communities. And that's not only happening to girls, it does happen to boys, even though in a smaller number, but it does. And then, of course, something that really puts children at risk are wars or internal conflicts, which either wars kill the children, the parents, maim the children through the warfare. Children are being hurt, children are losing limbs even, but then also children become refugees. And children who become refugees again miss out on education, they miss out on healthy family life. I have visited refugees in camps in Greece who came from Syria, and they told me about their past life. They showed me pictures. All they had left were their mobiles with pictures from their past life, which showed them having normal lives, having family celebrations, birthdays, weddings together. And suddenly all that was interrupted through a war, and they ended up running away with their children, ending up in refugee camps, and there was no education possible for the children. And so many children have missed out on years and years of education because of the war. Children who were supposed to go to the university but ended up being refugees and now unable to study, unable to get a further education. So children in war are very, very much at risk. Added to that, the whole trauma of experiencing bombs falling, of experiencing warfare, of experiencing the death of loved ones, the death of friends, which is a huge trauma for the children that they are experiencing. Another one that puts children at risk are preventable diseases. Now, why do I say preventable diseases? Many diseases that kill children don't have to happen, or we could do something. Measles, for example, which in developing countries still kills many children, can be prevented if we vaccine children. Or children die because of malaria. Now, malaria can be prevented if we have mosquito nets. Typhoid fever can be prevented by clean water. Diarrheas, if we give clean water. So many diseases that put children at risk and kill children can be prevented, often easily prevented, but they put children at risk. And then the last thing I have here is poverty and hunger, which puts so many children at risk. And poverty often is a reason for many other things. Puts children in the streets. It forces children to become child laborers. They are trafficked. Because of poverty, they might not have clean water, so they're at risk of catching diseases, dying of diseases. These are all issues that children are facing in developing countries. But the children in the more developed countries are equally at risk. I would say they are often at risk of too much, of having too much, while one issue is hunger and malnourishment. Another issue for many children is to be overweight and to have sicknesses because of that. For example, in India, children who are overweight and suffer from diabetes has become a real problem, which is, again, quite staggering. But also children who have everything but miss the love of parents, broken families, or too much internet and not much control. So in a way, I said half of all the children are at risk. But I would say many children are at risk in many countries. But God's heart is really to care for the poor, the widow, the orphan, and the foreigner. And He doesn't want the little ones to be lost. And we are called by God to share His heart and to do likewise. So even though these statistics might be staggering, but there are a few questions now. Consider what kind of children at risk you know, and where you could do something, where you could intervene, where you could help some children not to be at risk anymore.